Hi, this is Jeff Landers. I'm going to be replacing a starter in a 2004 Nissan Titan 4x4. On the difficulty scale, I'm going to give this a sphincter factor of 3 out of 5 sphincters. And speaking of sphincters, what were you thinking mounting the Nissan's starter in a spot where you couldn't change it out like you could a normal V8 engine that would normally take maybe 30 minutes? This is about a 2 to 3 hour job. Most web resources show that a Nissan dealer is typically going to charge between $600 and $800 for this job. So with that said, let's begin watching this. I've done this in high speed. So the first thing you want to do, is you would do anytime you work on a vehicle, is you want to make sure you disconnect the neutral side of the battery, which I'm doing here. Next, you want to take the two 10mm bolts off and you want to remove the engine cover. When you've got that off, you want to go through and you want to look at the different hoses. Right there, I'm actually disconnecting the air breather. This is a aftermarket kit that's been put on, so I want to remove it completely to get access to it. Then I'm going to go through and take off some of the various hoses that are around, that go around the fuel injection system, as you're going to be actually taking the entire manifold off, as well as the throttle body. So here I'm taking various hoses off. I'm taking a lot of the mounts off from some of the places. You can see the hoses that are all of the ones that attach to the manifold system there for fuel injection. Here I'm disconnecting the gas line. You can pick up one of these kits at the local AutoZone, is where I picked this up. You insert it into the coupling and it actually allows you to pull the coupling apart. One thing you're going to want to make sure you do in the beginning is have a fire extinguisher handy, just in case, because fuel is going to spill out a little bit. It is pressurized. I also like to put some tape over the fuel lines just to make sure that none drips out. After that, you're going to keep going through and make sure you've got all the hoses disconnected, and then you're going to take off the throttle body. Be very careful with this. Don't use power tools. Don't use anything powerful to harm the throttle body. On top of the cylinder head, you're actually going to see 8 fuel injection plugs. You're going to want to disconnect those. They're pretty easy to do. You may want to use a little pair of wire pliers for some of the ones on the back, just to kind of help you get those out. You want to remove those. Periodically, I like to take my air hose and blow debris, dust, dirt, grime, whatever, away from the manifold as much as you can, because you don't want any of this contaminant going into the engine once you pull the manifold off. Now there's 10mm bolts that are securing the intake manifold onto the top of the cylinder heads. Making sure that I've got all the hoses and everything disconnected. The breather hose, it's mainly breather hoses that you have to disconnect using a simple pair of pliers. Once that's done, you can see I'm pulling the system right off, and I'm taking these rags and putting inside the intakes, because you don't want dust or anything to get in there. Now there's the starter. Now the one thing that I did do, I messed up on this video, is actually show when I pulled the starter out and reconnected it. So there's 2 bolts here. Now, another Nissan engineering alert. You would think that you'd be able to get the starter out by using bolts that you could actually see. No, they're in reverse. So look like they're from the back of the engine around the transmission. And no, you cannot get to them from under the car. It is a tight fit. Thank you, Nissan engineers, but you can get it. I used an adjustable ratchet with a 14mm socket to get the 2 bolts out. They're a little tough. You may need a little mallet to exercise them out, but they do come out. Once you remove the starter, and again, I apologize for not having the actual video of this, but it's very simple. You're going to have 2 cables. One's going to be the cable that goes actually to the starter solenoid. You're going to disconnect that cable. Then you're going to pull the back of the plastic cover off that has the terminal that goes directly to the battery and replace that. Just make sure that you visually inspect to make sure you do have the same starter as far as the new one, just in case they didn't make a mistake and you have to go back and pick up another one. Now I have the starter out, you can see, and I'm using a vacuum cleaner and cleaning up the area with debris, for debris and anything that's in there that could contaminate the cylinder heads, as I've got those covered. Now I'm putting the new starter back in, hooking up the cables like I told you how to hook them up, putting it back together, and then remounting the starter. Once I've got the starter back in, again, I'm going to use some compressed air, and I'm going to blow using my air compressor to make sure there's no dust and debris around the cylinder heads before I take out. You can see now I'm taking out the paper towels that was protecting the intakes, and I actually visually inspected again to make sure there was nothing in there, nothing fell in, and then I placed the intake manifold back on and started putting everything back together, as you can see here. The manifold bolts are 10 millimeter. You don't want to over tighten anything. You just want to make sure that you get it all back together. I did make sure that on a couple of the breather tubes they didn't have hose clamps. I went ahead and put hose clamps on them. Just to, you can visually inspect all these hoses as they're going on, and you may need to replace something. Go ahead and replace it. Then you put it back together. You just want to make sure that you put all the hoses back where they were, all the electrical connectors. If you have an intake that's stock or an intake that's like this one, which is aftermarket, make sure you've got all the connectors back together, visually inspect it. Once you're done, you get the fuel line reconnected, everything looks good, reconnect your battery and fire it up.